Hello. Today we're talking about solving rational equations and inequalities. The first thing I want to bring you back to is, do you remember how to solve problems that had a lot of fractions in it? We multiplied by the least common denominator and our fractions disappeared. So in this first equation, our least common denominator is 6, so we're going to multiply everything times 6. Times 6 and times 6. So 6 canceled the 2 and left a 3. 3 times 1 was 3. 6 canceled the 3, left a 2. 2 times 2 was a minus 4x. And 6 divided by 6 is just 1, so 1 times 10 is 10. From here, the problem is a lot easier, and we can just solve it by minusing 3 to both sides. We're left with a minus 4x equals 7, and divide by minus 4, divide by minus 4, and you're left with x equals, well, 7, negative 7 fourths. Okay? So when we get rational equations with variables on the bottom, we can do the exact same thing and eliminate all those bottoms and reduce the need for the common denominators just by doing it once in the first place. In this problem, there's a d on the bottom, so our least common denominator will end up being 12d. So I'm going to multiply everything in here times a 12d, times 12d, and times 12d. The d cancels the d, and we're left with 12 times 2 is a 24, plus 12 divided by 4 is a 3, so 3d times 1 is just a 3d. And the 12 cancels the 12, and we're left with 11d. Now, the problem's a whole lot simpler, and we can solve it by minusing 3d to both sides. So we're left with 24 equals, what is that, 8d. Divide by 8 on both sides to get d by itself, and you're left with 3 equals d. Now, the one last thing you got to double check on these types of problems is, your answer, does it make, if you put it in your original equation, will you end up dividing by 0? Because that's kind of a no-no. In this case, 2 divided by a 3 is not a 0. We're not dividing by 0 anywhere else in the equation. 3 is our answer. They're also going to give you equations. Okay, so if there's pluses and minuses in the denominators, remember, you have to treat these equations with parentheses around them. Factor them. Find out what are your pieces. I can simplify this to a v plus 4 and a v minus 4. So then I have another v minus 4 out here. And so my common denominator is going to be that v squared minus 16, or I can call it v plus 4, v minus 4. So you can interchange whichever works the best for you. And so we'll multiply both top and bottom, or I'll multiply everything in the equation by that v squared minus 16. This one, I'm going to write it as the v plus 4 times v minus 4, mostly because it'll make it easier to cancel. And this one, since I'm going to have to put it all together, I'm just going to call it the v squared minus 16. They're all the same anyway. So the first one, the v squared minus 16 cancels both of those. So all I'm left with is just the plain old 12. The v minus 4 cancels the v minus 4, and I'll have to distribute that 24 to both of those. Don't forget about this minus. This 24 is technically a minus, so I'm going to get a minus 24v and a minus 96. Okay, equals. And then distribute the 3 to both of those. We're left with 3v squared minus 3 times 16 is 48. So then let's just put it into standard form. I'm going to minus 24v to both sides, minus 24v. That gives me a 12 minus 96 equals 3v squared minus 24v minus 48. We're going to minus 12 minus 96 is a minus 84. So I'm going to plus 84 to both sides. Plus 84 to both sides. Forgive me if I'm skipping a couple steps. So that'll be 0 equals 3v squared minus 24v. And then a plus 84 and a minus 48 leaves a positive 36. All right, so now we have a quadratic. And that's okay because there's no fractions involved. Yes, we can still get two answers with this. So I'm looking at this, and we could go straight to the quadratic formula with it, or I'm noticing all three of these, I can divide by 3. That'll make my terms a little bit simpler. So v squared minus 8v plus 12, and that is a lot easier to factor. I believe that is a 6 and a 2 make 12, so we want both of them minus 6v minus 2v is 8v. Yep, okay. So if that equals 0, then I can say v has to equal a positive 6 or a positive 2. So those are my two answers. Double check. Do they make my original equation? They make my original equation divide by 0 at any point? Nope. So we're done. So if I have something that's really complicated like this, still, don't worry about it. Just what's your least common denominator? R plus 1 times r minus 1. So that's going to be my common denominator. So we're going to multiply everything times, and I'm going to call it r squared minus 1 for the first term, times an r squared minus 1 for the second term. And the third term, because one of them will cancel out, I'm going to call it the r plus 1 times the r minus 1. Okay, so there's no bottom on here. That gives me an r cubed minus r plus. This cancels that, so the whole bottom's gone. So we're just left with a r squared minus 5 equals. And the r plus 1 cancels the r plus 1. You're left with, well, we're going to have to factor it and FOIL it. So an r squared times r is going to be an r cubed minus r squared. Oops. We'll have a plus r squared. We'll have a minus r plus 2r and a minus 2. So no fractions, but now we're going to have to simplify this thing. Okay. So I'm noticing right here I got a minus r squared and a plus r squared. Those cancel out. Those leave a 0. So I'll have a r cubed and a minus r and a plus 2r is going to leave a plus r minus 2 on that side. This I don't see too much. I'm just going to rearrange it. R cubed plus r squared minus r minus 5. So there's less on the right side. So let's minus r cubed minus r cubed. How nice is that? Both of those drop off. R squared minus r minus 5 equals r minus 2 minus r to both sides. We're left with a r squared minus 2r minus 5 equals minus 2. So it's plus 2. Plus 2. And we're left with a r squared minus 2r minus 3 equals 0. Now, we can factor this to an r and a r, a 1 and a 3. And let's make this one minus and that one plus. That gives me r equals a -1 or positive 3. Last thing we got to check, so no matter how big they are, you can always simplify it and get down to your right answers. A -1 and a positive 3, does that make the original equation divide by 0? Yes, it does right here. If I put in a -1 plus 1 would equal 0. The whole thing divided by 0 can't happen. So that means this is not my answer. The only answer I can have is r equals 3. And 3 won't upset the balance either. So there it is. Last thing that you need to know is inequalities. And what's tough with inequalities is that when we multiply times our common denominator, in this case it's pretty simple. It's just a c plus 2 times a c plus 2. Am I multiplying times a positive number, or am I multiplying both sides times a negative number? Because if it's negative, I need to flip the sign, but if it's positive, the sign stays the same. The problem is, because it's a variable, you can't tell. So what I want you to do is treat it like an equal sign. So when we cancel the top and bottom, we're just left with a 4 equals c plus 2. So if I minus 2 to both sides, we're left with a c equals 2. Now, the problem is, on a number line, we need to figure out if this is 0, 2, are we shading above it or below it? So if I go back to my original equation and I plug in a 3, for instance, a 3 plus 2 is 5, is 4/5 greater than 1? No, it's not. So we're not shading up above here. But what about if I plug in a 1? Put a 1 in the C spot. Does 1 plus 2, it's a 3, is 4/3 greater than 1? Yes, it is. So that means we are going to shade that direction. The trouble comes into if I wanted to pick, say, -6, and I put in a -6 in here, in that C spot, -6 plus 2 is going to be a -4, which equals -1. Is -1 bigger than 1? That's not true. So down here does not work. We can't be shading that point. So what happens is there's another dividing line somewhere, and it's pretty easy to pick out. It's looking at this bottom right here. Whatever number makes this a dividing by 0 is going to be a second division area. So c plus 2, the only number we can't put in there would be a -2. So if I go back here to -2, that's going to be my other dividing line. And since -6 won't work and 1 does, basically we're trying each and every of the 3 sections. This area in between here will be my answer. So I will write that as C has to be in between -2 and +2. So, in closing, solve for one answer and look at what makes the bottom 0. And those are your 2 numbers, and you're either going to be in between or on the outsides. Test all 3 spots in between all 3 of those to find out if C is in between them or on the outsides. Good luck. Have a great day.